I just
Okay.
did.
Great.
Richard, has anybody ever said no?
Only once, I think. I can't tell who did it, but
I think I know. All right, at 7:04 p.m., I'm going to call this meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Our regular members are myself, Anna Tamel, James Laporta, Christine Gray, and Keith Bodwell. I'm going to seat Bruce Bennett for Steve Sicardi until he comes in. Is there anybody else missing? No. Karen is missing, but nobody can take her place, and she may yet make it. So I'm going to jump the agenda.
Phil West, is he missing?
No, yes, Phil. Okay, thank you, James. I'm going to seat Will Evans for Phil West, who can't make it. Thank you.
Yep.
The first, I would like to have a motion to add an item to the agenda at the beginning. And the item is a thank you to Richard Griggs. Could I have a motion, please?
I'll move.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, hands up. Keith, say aye.
Aye.
One abstention. Oh, who's taking notes? Who's our secretary, James?
Phil West,
Okay.
Will Evans.
I'm taking notes. She can always watch it too.
Oh, here
All right.
comes Karen, Madam Chair. Here
Thank
she
you.
is. You're welcome.
So this new agenda item is a thank you to Richard Griggs for his steadfast attendance at these meetings and the recordings thereof. I had an insight into how important the recordings are when I went to his YouTube channel and took a look at how many views our recordings have garnered. So as an example, on February 9th, 2021, this was the meeting where we discussed the home business. I don't remember. It was the meeting before we passed the home business regulations. It had 83 views on the YouTube channel. On March 30th, 2021, our meeting to adopt the home business regulations, during which we made our deliberations and our decisions, had 95 views. I think these recordings are a significant benefit to our town, to people who want to know what's happening within the commissions and the boards. So I just want to formally thank Richard for his work. I'm sure you all agree.
You're here.
You're here. Thank you, Richard.
We would not have gotten that kind of participation if we were all trying to sit in the library, I can promise you. Especially in the winter months. Next order on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the December 8th regular meeting. I presume everyone's read them. You've certainly received them. Can I have a motion to accept as written?
So move.
Second?
Second.
Thank you, Keith. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next is pending new applications and pending applications where there are none. And if Karen Nelson has caught her breath, she's going to talk to us about how she's working on the zoning permit at our request. If you will recall, we asked her to reformat the permit to take into account some of the things that had been left out in the past. And I might note that having looked at the permits that were used during the 1980s, I will tell you that our current permit form is at least 40 years old. So Karen, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself.
There we go. Now can you hear me? I apologize. I don't know what was going on, but there seemed to have been some goblins in the neighborhood or something. Thank you, Janelle, for logging on so quickly. Speaking of the zoning permit, it's amazing. I married into that zoning permit. It's been here, I've been here 15 years, so it goes way back. The zoning permit is really basic. The back indicates that you can use a plot plan. The front, asks for marginal information, which, size of property, whatever. But the big thing is the categories. And I am suggesting, being that the zoning regulations have moved so far forward, in that to try and list everything that is considered a structure or a use or a whatever, that we tie it to the use chart, so that we can tie our businesses in, we can tie our special permits in, so that someone applying for a zoning permit, if they can go to the use chart to see what they need to do, as opposed to trying to list everything on the zoning permit for which you would need a special permit, if it's a house with an accessory apartment. So Janelle, I'm going to throw that question over to you. I know a lot of towns have interesting zoning permits, but our zoning permit is, it doesn't,
Minimal.
it's minimal. Is it wrong to tie it, to encourage someone to go to another table to see what they need to, if somebody were to go to our website and look to see if they needed a permit, to look at the use chart, which would say you need a zoning permit, a special permit, et cetera, et cetera. Can we legally tie it to a use chart that is not in the zoning regulation, but can be a guiding document?
I would say yes. I would definitely say, and again, like you asked the question legally, just based on my planning practice, not at all attempting to give any sort of legal advice, but just in what I have seen, to keep the zoning permit as simple as possible. If there is a pertinent user-friendly visual that could be used or employed, such as the use permit, the use table rather, should you wish to use that as a tool, I say, why not? But I also ask the question, is there another way to get at the information that you're looking for?
Couldn't it just be attached to the permit, Karen?
It would, if the zoning permit was up on the website and then there was the directive with a link to the use chart, then.
Well,
they could
that's one way to do it too, but if the permit were a PDF, and so it could be a 2-pager or a 3-pager with the use chart literally attached to it, so that if people print them out, they'll get everything they need.
Yeah, I could do that too. I guess the question goes back to Janelle. The use chart that you gave us is a guiding document.
Mhm.
Well,
It-
it reflects what's currently in our regulations.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
James has his hand up.
Yeah, I just had a concern because the use chart currently has a lot of holes in it.
Yeah.
And,
That's,
and I don't know if we want to actually emphasize that until we button that up.
It's a good
Just
point.
because it might raise more questions than answer.
Karen,
Mhm.
did you have a visual in the meeting materials that you want me to bring on the screen, just so everyone can understand?
I think that,
The use chart went into the folder that everybody had access to. Did you all see it?
Yes. Yeah.
and
You
and
will?
the zoning permit is in the folder too.
So I can bring that up because that might be helpful.
Yeah, just bring the use chart up. We'll have another look at it.
So this is that zoning permit that was in the folder of meeting materials for this evening.
Yes.
Great. And then let me just pull up, this is the use chart. And again, this is based on the current regulations. What we're embarking on tonight is a review of a lot of definitions. So per these notes in the use chart, there were a lot of questions around some uses, how they're defined, word choice, etc.
Could you zoom in on that a little bit?
of course, I'm sorry.
I want to respond to the comment James made and to remind him that as we go through our regulations right now, we're not actually changing any of the regulations. So the use chart should remain a good tool into the near future. We haven't started working on the town plan or addressing any of the recommended zoning changes in the affordable housing plan. So I can't see the uses themselves changing anytime soon.
No, it was just, it seemed like wherever there's a blank, that was, I think, where we needed further clarification to see if that's supposed to be a special permit requirement or a standard permit requirement. So we've got a lot of slots there with no indication what's the actual requirement in specifically the Cornwall Plains has a bunch of kind of question marks.
Well, because a farm store and a farm vacation isn't allowed in the Cornwall Plains zone.
So we could
That's
have, another symbol that basically says at the very end, CZEO.
There you go.
Right.
That's a good one. Consult with ZEO.
ZEO.
Or if it's not allowed, if we had a different.
NA, not allowed.
Yeah.
What do you think, Janelle? Can you stick that in there?
Well, I'm just thinking this through in respects to the zoning permit and how the zoning permit will serve as a tool to not only get the town the information that the town needs in the event that somebody applies, Karen all the information that she needs, and then also as a tool for the residents so that they are understanding what the regulations say. I mean, this will provide itself useful. I'm sure it will also need some clarification. I'm sure.
Well, isn't that kind of where we are? I mean,
Yeah.
It's a work in progress and it's not intended to be the be all end all. So if someone has, you know, it will answer some people's questions, and we could put a disclaimer at the bottom that if individuals looking at that form have questions or are unclear, that they should contact the ZEO.
Which
Yeah.
they
But,
will.
you know, for now, someone looking, for example, oh, can I put a home office in where I live? They're going to see XXXXXX across that, whatever the X means, I've forgotten.
Right.
It's allowed.
Well, so the other tricky part is though that these are uses and not necessarily like items that you might be permitting, if that makes sense, right? So instead, like the current application has something for a new, what is it? A new driveway, new residence.
New residents, a change of use, it goes.
Right.
Change of use, and then, but the fact is, the use chart would really have to take out going on the right-hand side, and I have that awful gap with glasses and no glass. The following will also require a special permit application. That there's no room to put everything in that we need there, so it would be better if that was at least tied. And the other side, it is pretty basic, new residents. It doesn't take into account, for instance, it doesn't call out generators and some other things, but it's still pretty, it pretty much covers 90%. Solar panels, James, as you
Exactly.
know, solar panels are considered a structure because they're attached to the ground. Is that on there? I have a fair amount of solar panel applications, amazingly enough, over the years. You know enough to come in with a zoning permit because you've asked.
Now, can you put the form back up?
Yeah, which
The
form?
use-
I'm
The
sorry.
use table, sorry. The use table.
No, it's okay. Just, yes, here we go. And
Yeah, that's always been treated as an accessory structure in most towns.
Right. But it's still, so I mean, there could be, the difference is, I think, between the use table and some of the items that get permitted, like a solar array or a swimming pool or a house are not, it's not the same as the uses, right? Instead of say new residence on the form, on the use table, it's called a single family dwelling, right? And so I think that the use versus the object
Hmm.
Well,
should.
having just seen the zoning permit application for the first time this evening and think it through in relation to the use table, where I really struggle is how nuanced things can be in zoning. There might be a non-conforming use. There might be some outlier that's, again, very much a knowledge base where the CEO is going to be working with the applicant to really steer them in the right direction as far as permitting process, approval process goes. So I think rather than to try to simplify everything to fit within a use table, the use table will serve as a tool. I'm not positive that the zoning permit will be the avenue where this tool is best used.
I'm thinking of an alternative, which is simply to have at the very top of the zoning permit, without trying to encapsulate all of our zoning regulations on one page, to tell the individual that they need to speak to the CEO about what it is they're seeking to do so that they'll know which questions they have to answer.
Well, I was trying, the reason this kind of came up is the whole list of the special permit uses, which would, on the zoning permit, it would appear that those are the only things that need a special permit. So I think that whole box probably needs to come out, because if it's not complete, don't have it in there.
Yeah,
And so if that came out, then and leave the zoning permit simply for structures, and the special permit be separated from the zoning permit itself.
Is, is there a separate special permit application?
Yeah, and the special
Yeah.
permit application is pretty basic. It's very hard for people to fill in, because if they fill in the special permit application, they have to go to the zoning regulations and figure out where something fits in. So believe me, 95% of the time, I have to put the section and whatever. Somebody comes in for detached accessory apartment, all they know is they want to put, an apartment in their garage, to try and tell them to fill in where that is and what they need to do, or where they need to go and what they need to do, is my job.
All right, maybe instead of putting the use table in there, we should remove the paragraph on special permit applications.
And
Approve this zoning permit form, because it is a zoning permit form. It's not a special permit form.
mhm,
And address the special permit form at another time.
okay, all right.
Now,
Because
I'm not making this decision by myself. I'm interested in hearing what everybody else thinks of that suggestion. Any
Madam
comment?
Chair, I'm just going to stop my share for 1 second because I do want to reference one other document.
Sure.
Just,
I'm-
okay, great.
That's fine.
Just not to throw everyone off, but I've recently gone through a very similar exercise. And just thinking through, for zoning permits, what I have often seen is a project information section. So just please describe the proposed project, including dimensions of the proposed structure, if applicable, as well as the proposed use. And typically that's for the zoning agent, the town staff, to discern what use it would then fall into.
What do you think, Karen?
I think I know what Janelle is in some fashion referencing, because there's been more and more questions raised as to residential components and things like that. I think that that's a good idea.
Where it's a little more open-ended and it's just, please describe your project, let me know the use. And you can, as zoning enforcement officer, you can start to see sometimes you start to see the beginning of an enforcement issue before it even arrives, or
Amen to that, yes.
or a situation where you're like, you know what a slippery slope looks like a studio that may become an apartment, little things like that, where if you just leave it up for the applicant to provide you with the information, then you know what follow-up questions
Yes.
one might ask them.
So Karen, look, if you take out the special permit parts, you'll have room for that part.
All
That
right,
descriptive
All
part,
right.
blank lines, right?
yes, okay.
Bruce,
Yeah, that's
Would
what
it
I'm
be,
saying.
would it be helpful? I know you were.
I'm
you were
sorry,
ta-
Keith, I'll call on you as soon as Bruce is done.
Would it be, you were talking about how difficult it is for people to know what's in the regulations. Would it be a good idea maybe to point them to a specific part of the regulations? So where you have alterations, addition to decks, porches, et cetera, isn't that all going to be in one area of the zoning regulations that you could point them to and help them fill out these things?
Oh, Bruce,
In
with all
other
due
words,
respect,
go
I
to the.
usually help people fill out. the
What's
zoning
that, Karen?
permit. I usually end up helping people fill out a zoning permit anyway, so yeah.
Oh,
It's,
you do?
Someday, thinking the way Bruce is, we'll have a dream in which the zoning permit can be filled out online and it will have hot links to the permanent set,
Perfect.
the
Yeah.
pertinent sections. But for now, well, we'd better just make a small change.
Why doesn't Karen do that? Get that up and going.
Um, because it's not as easy as it sounds.
Right.
We are all, with the exception of Will and Christine, we're all of a particular, and Phil, we're all of an age that the new technologies aren't that easy to master, correct?
I'm the same age as Phil.
Okay, James. Yes,
But I don't know about
I'll
that
put
stuff.
you-
Phil
So
knows
let's-
technology.
Let's summarize what I'm sensing we're moving towards. Keeping the application as Karen has shown us, we'll remove any mention of special permits. We'll postpone modifying that application for now. And instead, we will have an open-ended paragraph where people are asked to describe what it is they're trying to do, which I think should prove quite useful to Karen
yes,
when she
Mhm.
helps them figure out what's needed.
thank
Is
you, Janelle. I appreciate that because you explained exactly why I'm bringing this up, because there's
Okay.
been several slippery slopes lately.
So can I ask you all to one at a time to verify whether you think this is okay or if you have other questions? So I'll start with Will, because you're to the right of me on my screen. Unmute yourself, Will. Do you think it's okay what I just
Yeah,
described?
I mean, I'm not really in favor of the use table. I think it could lead people in the wrong direction, assuming that they don't have to touch base with other entities such as Torrington Area Health. And if they see that they have it by right or by permit, they expect that they can just submit that and with the ZEO and be good to go. So
Good.
I think
Yeah.
it's a little tricky including it.
Okay, and Bruce, what about you?
Yeah, no, I think it's probably good. I think the simpler you make it, the better for people to start filling it out. And I guess that's true that the zoning enforcement officer always is the one that's very helpful about filling these things out. So I guess there's always that backup, and it should avoid making it complicated.
Christine?
Agreed. I think a description is great. I've seen on other zoning permits where the ZEO gets to apply certain restrictions or conditions to the permit. And I don't know if that's something Karen wants to do. I know she and I were talking about setbacks recently. Is there a reason, or would there be a purpose to putting something where it says where the zoning enforcement officer gets to make a note on it and send it back to the applicant? Or is it really just kind of an in-person thing, right? Like should the zoning officer request that something be staked by the surveyor prior to construction, or is an as-built required? And that's like, I see that all the time, you know, if at that you get the zoning permit, it's like as-built required, I know I'm gonna have to call the surveyor at the end of the project and make sure that I am within my setbacks.
Christine,
Wow.
thank you. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Very interesting. I worked in a town for many years that required for me to even go out on a site and sign off on a certificate of zoning compliance. You had to have an as-built. Now, this was a town with your 2-acre zoning and there weren't as many issues. On the back of the zoning permit, it talks about a plot plan. And a lot of people will just come in with a plot plan. I will supply a plot plan because on a 5-acre lot or a 10-acre lot that you've got something in the middle of a lot with hundreds of feet away, you're not
Plenty of
going to
space.
ask for a survey, an A2, a plot plan, an estimation. But I recently had someone on a very large acre parcel put everything right on the setback line, and I conditioned the permit that it would not be issued, that the building permit could not be issued until the corners were pinned and before the foundation was poured. What an uproar. You would have thought that I had
Really?
just, oh yeah, unbelievable.
So Karen, listen, is there room on the form for a bottom few lines where ZEO condition is written?
The CEO, and for instance, if with a house that you come with a site plan that comes in and it says that you have to have silt fence, you have to have erosion sedimentation controls, those are conditions that are part of the permit that, you know, you have to call the office prior to the start of construction, or you have to have a foundation pinned before.
All right, so there should be room for that, Karen.
And
to
it
make
could just be, it could just be a checkbox that says P and Z conditions apply. And then Karen
Yeah.
can write what the conditions are.
Because I always, my zoning permits, especially if it's mapping that is tied to a specific map, and Keith Bodwell can address this. If you have a zoning permit that comes in, it shows silt fence, it shows everything for the construction of a residence, that is part of the zoning permit. Because I reference the map, the title of the map, the date of the map, preparation of the map. So all of that is part of the zoning permit. It's not just the structure, it's the E&S controls, it's what has to be done prior to the start of construction, et cetera, et cetera.
So I'm
he's
going to
referencing the
segue
map.
to,
I'm referencing the map as a way of saying that there are conditions on it, because it's as for everything that you've had. A plot plan is
but
different.
I think it should be there on the permit when you send it out. I'd like Keith Bodwell to comment now.
Yeah. Hey, Karen, I think we should just add A2 to everything, right? Generate some more work.
How long do
You are not to take,
Cornwall?
you have to
I'm just
recuse yourself from that statement, surveyor man.
I'm just joking.
It does A2s serve a purpose, and it has been seen by some of the ZBA applications and things when the A2 survey comes in and reveals what has happened over years. Sometimes it's pleasant, sometimes it isn't, and a lot more people are going to be moving into A2 surveys to qualify what they own, as everybody starts to figure out that maybe they don't own as much as they thought. But it
I'm
seems,
dealing with 2 of those over in Goshen right now.
yeah, it's coming in Cornwall. I'm not going to say that it's going to be accepted very easily right now. I think it needs to be talked about and
Okay,
encouraged.
so we'll postpone
Well,
discussing that further to another time because we have a lot of business to conduct tonight.
Yep.
James Laporta, any final comment?
Keith, did you want to mention anything else?
No, I was just gonna say, I agree, you know, let's put something on the form that where you describe it, and, you know, and I think as our regulations get clearer as we work on reformatting them, I think it'll be easier for the applicants to fill it out without having to use Karen so much to fill out the form.
Thank you for that. All right, James, yourself?
Yeah, I agree. I also like Will Evans' comment there. I agree with that, that I think the
Yeah.
use table, I'm
Yeah.
a little concerned, but it sounds like that's the plan.
No, it
Um,
isn't the
of not-
plan.
No, I mean the plan of not
Right,
tying
right.
that.
Right.
Also, I didn't know if we wanted to have, and maybe, I'm sorry, I didn't look at the permitting the application carefully. Is there a statement that all planning and zoning regulations apply or something like that? Just a blanket statement so people realize that there is a backdrop to our regulations, that just because it's not specifically stated on this application, that they still have the ENS controls, they still have to do Torrington Area Health,
Mhm.
whatever is applicable, that we might just want to have a statement that if we're making it more user-friendly, that they also, the user understands that there is a whole underlying set of criteria that's part of our regulations that still need to be addressed and performed adequately.
I'm going to ask Karen to go ahead and work on it some more
Okay.
and bring it back to us to review at another meeting, because we've had a lot of fantastic input. And I think the final product should be reviewed again when we can see it. Sound okay?
Yep.
Okay. The other thing that you had mentioned talking about is just a quick reminder for the people attending tonight who aren't commissioners, as well as any viewers that might come later, what the deadlines are for submitting applications, as well as written public comment.
Applications, for instance, special permit applications should be in to my office well before Thursday noon, when I leave and am not back until next Tuesday. Technically, my office is closed as of Thursday noon. Things come in late. That's usually the reason that, as many people know, I'm oftentimes, probably 80% of the time, I'm in Cornwall. On Saturday gives me the quiet time to do paperwork and wrap things up and to get things put together. Zoning also ties to wetlands. Wetlands has some interesting other dynamics in terms of when applications must be accepted. Sometimes some people can play with those deadlines to their advantage. It's usually not too appreciated, but it happens. But I need the time to get enough information in. If you all want to see everything on the agenda, but a special permit dropped on my desk at, Thursday at 11:45, when it's just bits and pieces, is usually not, it means that there's an awful lot of work. And frankly, it is incomplete. I tend to try and help people to move forward, especially if there's some extenuating circumstances, which there often is. But it timely means that not at the last minute, not 3 or 4 days before the
Okay.
meeting, especially.
So I'm going to reiterate. We have a part-time zoning enforcement officer. We have a part-time staff. The public needs to understand that. Written commentary, letters, and applications cannot be expected to appear on an agenda on any given the Tuesday following Thursday at noon. And Karen has a tendency to give her own private time, to bend over backwards. It's a very attractive feature of our ZEO, but we also have to realize that not everybody's going to be like her, and she will be eventually retiring. So these are our deadlines, and we're going to stick to them. Okay, now we are moving on to correspondence and communications, but have there been any?
No, not anything directly sent to the commission.
Okay. There has been one piece of correspondence that I shared with all of you that was addressed to me personally. Therefore, it is not on the agenda. It's not recognized formally. The public needs to be made aware that correspondence has to be funneled through Karen's office if people desire it to be formally recognized by the commission. Does anybody have any questions or comments about all of these things that we've been talking about now? Or can I move on? Speak now or forever? Okay.
Anna, did you want me to do the 4 zoning permits? So right now, just an overview of the zoning permits?
No, I do not.
Okay. All right.
What 4 zoning permits? There's
The
only
zoning
one.
permits that were listed at the very end of the agenda.
I must not have printed page 2. We don't usually go over them in detail.
Okay.
Unless you, oh, I found it. Unless
Yeah.
you have a particular problem or concern that you
No.
need us to be aware of.
No, I just wanted to point out that there are 2 zoning permits. One's for a cottage kitchen and the second one is to return a small business back to the neighborhood. And that is one that I did work on Saturday. I have to admit there are some extenuating circumstances. I just wanted to say that I'm beginning to see the results, and they're all positive results of the home regulations being enacted. They are creating a pathway for people to come in and start to think about and do things and realize that it can be done easily, legally, and acceptable. And I think the change in the regulations, as difficult as it was for all of us to get through, has been very beneficial to the town. And so you are to be commended for putting your head down. Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. That's really good to hear. That's what we love to hear. More businesses in town, more people being able to make a living as they live here.
Yeah.
All right, the next other business proper to come before the commission is, election of officers. And I can't run this part because I don't know how to do it. Somebody else, can you help me, Karen? I've never done that before.
I think someone could make a motion, put it on the floor to nominate somebody for chairman.
I nominate Anna Tamel for chairperson.
I second.
Richard's laughing. Are there any other nominations or nominees?
What other things are we supposed to have? Do we need to renominate Phil as secretary or?
Well, we will have to do all of that, but
Vice
anybody on this commission who would like to be nominated to be chairman should feel free to say so.
And then you can ask hearing none for somebody to close the slate of nominations and vote.
Okay, so any other nominations from the floor for chair? Okay, I will need a nominee for vice chair.
Vote on each one separately.
Okay, so all in favor of me continuing as chair, and I will recuse myself, raise your hands. Keith?
Aye.
Thank you. Richard's hand doesn't count. I'm sorry. Okay, we need a nomination for the vice chair. And it is currently James Laporta. For those of you who are somewhat new to the commission, traditionally the vice chair steps in if the chair can't attend a meeting. And traditionally the vice chair is in line to become chair once the elderly chair drops dead of something. So, or
I
gives
no- I nominate
my
James
name.
Laporta as vice chair.
Second.
anyone else want to be nominated as vice chair? Okay, all in favor? You
Aye.
recuse yourself, James. Aye. Okay, that passes unanimously. And finally, we need a nominee for secretary. Currently, Phil West is the secretary. The secretary has no idea how lucky they are, because when Cornwall first had zoning regulations in 1940, the chair had to keep all the minutes. I mean, the secretary had to keep all the minutes, type all the letters, and contact people who, by letter, who were found by the commission to be out of compliance. So it was a significant role. Currently, it's almost non-existent, but we have never abolished the position. So we need to nominate a secretary.
Don't we normally nominate somebody who isn't on the screen right now?
Yeah, I
Normally,
nominate-
yes.
If
Phil
you don't
West.
show up, you're it.
A second for Phil. Thank you, Christine. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, it's James and Christine for Phil West, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So now, is that for a year or for 2?
6 months,
Huh?
6 months.
Okay, that's fine. I don't really know what the term is.
I think it's a year.
Okay.
Annual, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to move on to our planning workshop because we have a lot of work to do. I want to just give a little historical background that there have been actually very few occasions where the zoning regulations in Cornwall had a complete going over by the commission. I have been reading old records. The first major the original zoning regulations were adopted directly from the state statute in 1940 without any sort of local flavor or decision making. It wasn't until 1953 that the commissioners had enough experience and felt comfortable acting on changing the regulations. It took a very long time, lots of public hearings and discussions, but they made the first really major changes to the zoning regulations in 1953, including a change in the preamble, which I just have to read to you because it's so reflective of the times. In order to promote the health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community, blah, 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 blah. Morals did not make it into the 1970 revision or the 1987 revision, but that was the very last one. And for people in the audience and in the public who don't really comprehend why we're doing this now, I think it should be obvious. Times have changed. The state laws have changed. We need to reformat our regulations to make them more explanatory, to make them easier to deal with and not use archaic language. We're not going to be addressing amendments. We're just adding language and rearranging things to make the regulations easier to work your way through as an applicant. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Janelle.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for that preamble. I always appreciate the history. I'll bring up the screen, but just to the zoning permit point, the discussion that was had earlier, I think that's definitely where the regulations can also serve. So rather than just a single sheet form that Karen has to give to applicants, but for there to be a strong zoning permit section in the regs. Right now it starts on page 2 of the existing regs. That's really explanatory for somebody coming in so that they understand just a summary of what they expect. So more and more we'll work towards that so that, you know, the work becomes easier on everyone's end, be it an applicant, commissioner, or land use staff. But I'll grab my screen. I just wanted to bring up the quick point that we had a discussion around the map and the pixelation from last time. So I've gone back to HVA and they've created, or rather just resent me a map with better scaling and better pixelation. So hopefully this will be a better choice for what will go into the document.
Fabulous.
Yeah, so that now we can finally, I think it's definitely much more understandable where the 500 and the 300 with the center lines come from. It's really helpful to have that graphic in there. So just for everyone to see, that map has been updated. So just before I get going, were there any questions from what we've discussed, or does anyone very clearly remember where we left off and where we should begin?
I'll make a comment about the map just for a moment, that over the years, there were many, many problems with the mapping. And the original descriptions of where the residential zones were and the business zones generally followed geographic features, but in quite a few cases also directly named property lines and the current owner, which is a terrible way. And I'm wondering if Keith can tell us, will we ever be able to have our zoning boundaries delineated by GPS points?
Well, GPS isn't known for its accuracy as far as survey grade.
Oh, boy.
So we do
Okay,
use
then.
it in some aspects, but when you get into the woods and stuff, it's no good. So, so yeah, probably not.
All right, thanks, Keith. My ignorance. Sorry, Janelle, carry on.
No. So any questions from anything that we thought about last time, discussed last time, and where shall we begin?
Keep moving down, I think.
Fantastic.
Did we not go through general provisions?
No, I think that's where we went to.
Yeah.
Okay, all right,
That's what my notes say. That's where we stopped.
okay.
Perfect. That was my recollection as well. So general provisions, just to recap the purpose of this section and why we're moving it to Article 3. So general provisions will give an overview of general standards that apply in all zones and all permissible uses. It's sort of a nice precursor to not only the definitions, but also dimensional requirements and use requirements, because regardless of all of that, these standards will still apply. So there are certain, the first section is about conformity. This is verbatim from the existing regulations. I made note both conformity and non-conformity. That comes from page 71 of the existing regulations. So this is where the reorganization really comes into play, where a lot of the language was pulled from another place in the regulations where it was touched upon once or touched upon sort of either as an afterthought or put into a chapter. And my intention in thinking this through was really to bring it to the forefront so that nonconformities are understood from the beginning rather than mentioned to the end. They're generalities that apply regardless of use, regardless of zone. So page 71, 74, 74 of the existing regulations is where it really gets into non-conforming. So I've brought this just straight up here.
Can I ask a question, Janelle?
Of course.
So as I was reading over this, I was looking through the old zoning regulations to try to find what you
Yeah.
were referencing or where this came from. I
Yeah.
found it was easier further down, but were you going to give us some way to be able to see that, when we receive this information about where we can find it in the old zoning regulations?
I can start to notate. So just to bring everyone back to the color coding, the black is text that is found in the current regulations. I don't mind putting in parentheticals the page that I am pulling it from.
Perfect.
I have the notes here in front of me, and come to think of it, it would have been nice for you to have that in the document. I do not mind notating that at all.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll be ready with the page numbers for all the definitions, because it was such an iterative process, and because, to be honest, I think a year ago I had embarked on doing some of this work. I'm revisiting it all now to make sure it cleans up, to make sure it makes sense, and to make sure that the new statutes are involved. But moving forward, happy to reference page numbers in the existing regulations.
Great.
Yeah, and when I, just for that, on that point, when I say existing regulations, I'm referencing what's currently online. So what one can access from digital download via the town website. Great. And then we get into, so non-conformity, hopefully it's straightforward. I add in other terms just because there's so much jargon in planning and there's so many terms that people use interchangeably. Whenever there's an instance, I like to put it into the regulations so that it's understandable that legally non-conforming and pre-existing non-conforming, that it's all stating the same thing.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay. And then moving forward, we do get into an introduction of some statutory updates, and this is somewhat new, and this is in accordance, it's a chapter of land use, which is 124. The regulations cannot prohibit the continuance of any non-conforming uses. So I have seen locally in regulations where there is a conflict saying if something has been abandoned, it's no longer. The statute was updated. I think this one was 2016. I might be mistaken, but it was relatively recently, not in the last batch of statutory updates. But it's basically stating there's not termination of any non-conforming use just because it hasn't been used that way for a specific period of time. Regardless of the intent of the property owner, even the demolition and the deconstruction of a non-conforming structure shall not by itself be evidence of a property owner's intent to not reestablish the use. This language is pulled directly from that statute.
There's a rich history here. Our original regulations said just the opposite,
Yeah.
but all over the state, other towns had regulations similar to these, and they were all tested in court. And what you see there now is what the judicial system in Connecticut decided.
So I added everything in green just to go back to that key. I've added as a point of clarity or just as a suggestion, and this is the final sentence: the property owner must prove the existence of a non-conforming use or structure should they wish to reinstate it. That's just so the understanding is that should a property owner want to come to Karen and have a sign that was, you know, of historic proportion, that it's on them to prove that it was once there.
That's great to have.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I know it leads, it can lead to questions sometimes. And then we get into uniformity. So uniformity, again, this is verbatim from statute, not that interesting, but it's just saying that regulations are uniform for each class or kind of building, structures, or use. So use of land through each zone is uniform, etc. And that's directly from statute. That's 8-2 zoning enabling statute. So the parameters in which the zoning commission works.
Can we go back to conformity and non-conformity very quickly?
Yeah.
There in the old regs, there are a whole bunch of, restrictions on structures and uses. It's what, like
A few pages, yeah.
a few pages.
Yeah.
Are we eliminating that, or is that going to be, are we kind of compacting it, or is that going to be later on in the regs?
So it's coming back where it's pertinent. So I think a really big one is for dimensional requirements. There's a clause in this non-conformity language on page, it might be 73 or 74. We'll be revisiting a lot of this. Anything that doesn't make its way back, I have a clean copy of the regulations that I'm highlighting, and I'll come before the commission with all of those explanations.
Cool.
A lot in the non-conforming chapter does have to do with statutory requirements and the fact that some of it is no longer in effect.
Okay.
But yeah, happy to address all of that. But a lot of it you will be revisiting, and I'll make note what pages that it's coming from.
Right.
Okay. And then next question, and this is just silly, but the conformity paragraph is an actual paragraph. So it says no building shall be altered unless in conformity. And then the non-conformity, that first paragraph, is not actually a functioning sentence. It's a definition. Does that make sense to you? Like grammatically? Lots, structures, and uses exist,
Uh-huh.
which would be prohibited, and they are allowed, or something like that, right? It is
I see what
Yeah,
you're getting at.
I
not a
do.
grammatically correct sentence, and I
Like
would
what-
like them to be the same if possible.
Yeah, why don't we, no lots. Lots of structure.
Christine seems to have become our grammar police. I really.
I find it so helpful because I've read these things so many times.
And they
Lots
both
of-
make sense separately, but if you're
Yeah.
trying to tie them together, they should follow the same structure.
I like your thinking a lot where it's, I mean, we don't have to do this now. I'm happy to circle it and think. of-
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
but
good.
why don't we do that?
Why
Let's
don't
do
I do that? Not to, but I'm just gonna make a big language choice. And okay. All right, so I'm glad you brought that up. So then getting into community standards, a lot of this is in green. And this just comes from a lot of it is just from my knowledge of regulations from neighboring towns, an understanding of updates to statutory requirements, and just a general sense of bringing general provisions to the forefront so that these things are thought about from the very beginning. Site access is actually mentioned on the page on driveways, and driveways comes very late in the regulations. It comes on page 62. So bringing the whole point around site access to the forefront and stating that all lots with a structure and or use located within the town shall have a convenient, safe, and suitable means of access to the town system of public highways and streets. That language is directly from page 62 of the existing regulations. And just in reading that, I feel like that's a very general consideration for land use in town, and to bring it to the forefront around site access. This is added, this careful consideration. I think this came in when we were discussing the POCD in the first iteration of working on the regulations. So it's understood that a lot of substance, we're not looking to change substance. So if this changes the intent of what we're trying to say around site access, I'm happy to get rid of it.
I had a question because I don't, I agree with both of the old site access statement as well as your new careful consideration given the safety of the pedestrian and non-motorized traveler. But it seems like in the first part, it's really talking about, and I think it came from specific lots and making sure that if you're going to have a use on a lot, that you can access it safely. Whereas the second part is more of, it seems like that's more town-wide in terms of that we should have, safety for pedestrians and non-motorized travelers throughout town on the public roadways, but it doesn't seem as applicable for a site access.
That's a
Seems
good
like
point.
it's,
Yeah. That's such a good point, James. Are you thinking, and we'll work through this, but if we get to, I mean, maybe even for us to think through, it could even fit very nicely under the community connectivity, which will come in when we get to part C. Because, connectivity is not only vehicular connectivity, but also.
yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I think that makes much more sense. So move to connectivity. Okay. So anyone else on the site access point? Okay, a lot of that is honestly safety. Then energy efficiency, this has certainly made its way into statutes. That's why the language is in blue. And this is very much from the zoning enabling statute 8-2, where it changed the word from encourage to promote in this last legislative change. And it's now stipulating that towns shall promote energy efficient patterns of development and promote the use of distributed generation or freestanding solar, wind, and other renewable forms of energy, combined heat and power, and energy conservation. That's all from Connecticut general statutes.
I can't conceive of any Cornwall citizen who would object to that language.
Okay.
Actually,
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only question would be, I can imagine somebody saying like, you know how there's that, like, there's a big outcry in Mass about the solar farms, and people don't like the large wind turbines. So there could be backlash just saying we don't actually want to promote every type of development. We want to promote limited
As-
scale development, maybe.
Yeah, and as it happens, both of those topics are on the long list of potential future regulation
Cool. Yep.
that I've been keeping during our many discussions. So,
and actually, if I may, my business partner Ray First is on Solar Connecticut Board of Directors. Karen Nelson knows him well. And he occasionally has done little talks for planning and zoning commissions, things like that, on the difference between commercial scale solar and how we might want to differentiate between those and residential solar, things like that. And
It's power generation versus energy efficiency. I think they're very different.
yes, but when we have these blanket statements in here promoting energy efficient patterns of development and promote the use of distributed generation, that has tripped up other communities in the past. And next thing you know, they've got a big solar farm. There's a difference between having a solar farm and just generating your own power to offset your electricity. But this statement still is, I'm okay with it, but we should probably think about that moving forward, as Anna mentioned at some point.
could we again quote the statute as you've done with some of the other paragraphs? So you start the sentence with per blah, blah, blah statute. And then you could actually even put the whole paragraph within quotes if you want to. It's just a
Sure.
suggestion. But yeah, we have to think ahead to these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This particular one is Connecticut General Statute 124.8-2. And to James's thought, as far as other regulations go, certainly other places within these regulations to really be very direct around, do we define solar panel arrays? Do we define solar farms? That's, I think, where we're going with the regulations, maybe not in this exercise of reformatting and reorganizing, but certainly as we're thinking through, these more, modern concepts and things that we're seeing in other states that are certainly plaguing small towns, how to adapt the regs over time.
Janelle, if I may add, that would be a great Fifth Thursday topic. I know you're starting that up. I saw that you're taking that on. I think that is something that would be great if you put it on your list for Fifth Thursday sometime in the next year or so.
Yeah, I know that was done within the past year. So I will definitely make note of it to plug the upcoming Fifth Thursday. It's March 31st. Attorney Ziska will be presenting on Public Act 2129. So that'll be a really informative evening.
He's fantastic.
But there's a lot to learn about solar. There's a lot to learn about all the renewable forms of energy. So if we're ready, are we ready to move on? I will make note of the statute that language comes from.
Okay,
And then community connectivity. Property owners are encouraged to consider the impacts of permitted land uses on the greater community. This comes from that same enabling statute, contiguous municipalities and on the planning region. Again, this is of recent, this comes from that Public Act 2129 that I just mentioned. That has reconfigured our zoning enabling act for the first time since I think it was post Great Depression. So since like 1940, it was really looked at with a lot of scrutiny and updated.
Is there room in this paragraph to put the rights of pedestrians and non-motorized vehicle drivers to safety?
Yeah, how do you feel about that language? Careful consideration shall be given.
Yeah,
Okay, so I'll carry over that language directly from what was once a part of A and bring it over here. So there's that around community connectivity. And then historic and cultural resources, this just careful consideration shall be given to protect the historic, tribal, cultural, and environmental resources of the town. The update to Public Act 2129 added tribal and cultural just recently.
I think that's a good addition.
me too.
And then environmental protection. So this gets into how Cornwall is rich in natural resources, conserved open space, measures to protect water bodies, aquifers, wetlands, watercourses, view sheds, air quality, scenic routes, wildlife corridors, farmland, ridgeline shall be incorporated into all aspects of development. Did I miss something in that list?
No.
I'm sure it might have. And then we do incorporate the language which is around erosion and sedimentation control. This has been in place since 2006, if I'm not mistaken. The regulations must provide that proper provisions are made for soil erosion and sediment control pursuant to Connecticut General Statute, Chapter 446H. Eventually, what I would really like is also reference the section where we discuss erosion and sedimentation unique to Cornwall.
We had talked before about hot links. Will there be hot links to the legislation?
Yeah, so my intent though, because we have no control over outside links, outside websites, etc.
Yeah.
I'm leery about doing any link to an outside source. I'm much more
Yeah, don't
comfortable.
link anything to state stuff.
Yeah, because you never know when the state will be updating something. So I'm much more comfortable with links internal to the document. So
Okay.
if we're referencing another section that talks about erosion and sedimentation control as owners of this document, I'm very confident with linking. Outside sources, not so much.
Okay, I hear you. Okay. And nowadays with the information revolution, you can just Google it and find it.
Yeah. And then we get into health and prosperity. Consideration shall be given to support public health and welfare by addressing significant disparities in housing needs and access to educational, occupational, and other opportunities in accordance with, back to that Connecticut General Statute, Chapter 124, 8-2.
We sure are responsible for a lot of things.
I know. I know. Then we get into landscaping. So landscaping is currently mentioned in the end of the regulations. And it's actually on page 64. It's one paragraph. And it's all about visual impacts. And this really brings landscaping back into more than visual aesthetic impacts, but So it reads, landscaping shall be done in a manner that reduces environmental harm, benefits local wildlife and pollinators, utilizes native plants, and encourages the use of local, renewable, and recyclable materials. And then it also touches upon the use of invasive and potentially invasive species are prohibited. That's been in Connecticut general statutes for quite some time, that the lists of the invasive species get updated on a regular basis. But right now, landscaping in the regulations, they really only serve as privacy. They're very conditional, and it's very unclear when it's applicable. So this took landscaping and brought it as part of the built environment, the land use environment, and just brings it into the forefront so that it's a consideration of all the regulations across all districts.
I'm
You know, I
very
have a question-
interested in what Bruce wants to say about this.
I I have a question about this. It seems as though what you're doing, or what this is saying, is that it's required that you use native plant material to do your landscaping. Otherwise, it would be considered harmful to wildlife, et cetera. And although there is some truth to that, is that what this is dictating?
Yeah, that's what I'm nervous about, the shall. I'm like, how do we lighten it? Because
I thought of that already.
my thinking when I reread it, do we want to have it be careful consideration shall be done? Maybe, because
I would say any verbiage that doesn't make it mandatory.
that's my thinking as well, Bruce, because there's a fiscal impact to this that should be considered. Like, it's not cheap. It is not cheap to landscape in this way. But I think it's important to just bring landscaping into the regulations rather than an afterthought around privacy and visual screening, because that's really the purpose that it serves right now in the regulations.
Why don't we say consideration should be given to doing landscaping in a manner, blah, blah, blah. And then when we get down to utilizes native plants, we say encourages the use of native plants, or
Right.
considers the use of native plants, maybe even better, more neutral to say considers.
I appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I think it's great to put, to encourage this and put people in this direction, just like, the solar energy, et cetera, is good to encourage. So it certainly is where things are headed. So I just don't want to see restrictions in there at this level.
I appreciate that, because as we grow too, we learn there's adverse impacts to things that you would never anticipate.
Right.
And it will be it an economic impact, or hard and fast rules can be really troublesome.
Right.
So I really appreciate those updates.
I think these community standards say something important about the culture of Cornwall, what the things are that people in Cornwall value. And it's pretty clear that we value nature very highly here. So I'm comfortable with having this as a community standard with that less than mandatory language. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
I
It's
would
perfect.
certainly like to be able to tell people that though they cannot plant winged euonymus anymore
There you go. You're
in
here.
the town of Cornwall, and especially in the village, so that Coltsfoot Valley doesn't become a red field of winged euonymus.
It's
You
all-
know, you do better through education, I think.
Yes.
And, the Conservation Commission has been trying to educate us.
Mhm. Yeah.
People
Karen,
don't, people
Karen, it's
don't
actually-
take,
Karen, it's
Pardon me?
actually Euonymus alata compacta. Not winged euonymus.
Winged euonymus.
Winged euonymus.
I have my lingo too.
All right.
all right, glare and noise. I think there are a lot of people in town who really love these paragraphs.
So this gets to land use activities shall not produce glare, heat, or illumination which extends beyond a site's property lines, creates a hazard or nuisance to neighboring property owners or on adjacent roadways. External lighting sources, except for overhead street lighting, emergency lighting, or traffic signals shall be screened or shielded from neighboring properties and adjacent roadways. With the exception of temporary construction projects, temporary noises such as lawnmowers, chainsaws, other agricultural or horticultural machinery, no permanent stationary source of noise shall transmit beyond its subject property lines. Any noise which is objectionable due to volume, intermittence, beat frequency, shrillness, or intensity.
These are regulatory changes. Because none of that language currently,
No, because right now on page 9 of the regulations, page 19 rather, there's a reference to the Torrington area health noise regulation, which has been rescinded.
right. So what I want to recommend, well, first of all, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that there's nobody here who has been to the public hearings we've listened to over the past year that feels that any of that is inappropriate. And I think when we have our public hearing about the reformatting, we have to be very clear that there is actually a proposal for a fundamental change in our regulation, and it's these 3 paragraphs.
When we were doing those regulations, Anna, there was mention that there were other things in zoning regulations that would apply to some of the things we were doing. And I think this is a great addition to that and kind of adds to the concern about noise and lighting, et cetera, and everything else that people were expressing concerns about. It's a good thing to add.
Yeah, I think the public will be happy that we put this in, but we're gonna have to be honest about what we're doing, okay? I mean, because we've been saying all along that we're not fundamentally changing our regulations. I think that this is very explicit where we were never explicit before. So it is a fundamental change. I want to embrace it. I'm hoping we can carry it along with the other changes. I'd welcome other comments on that.
Well, what about that, Anna? Are we actually changing regulations or adding regulations in here?
I don't know. I'm willing to be questioned too.
Janelle?
I mean, whenever I change anything, I say, yes, I'm making a change. I mean, yes, things are being changed. The state laws are being updated, things are being reorganized. Yes, there's change.
I think this is actually a fairly significant change in terms of, we didn't have a regulation specifically saying that you couldn't have a light source that you could see beyond somebody's property line. I have a concern, not that I don't agree with all this stuff, but that maybe the intent is there, but from an actual standpoint to claim that that is the case, I think is probably a bit much to ask. In other words, somebody has some lights by their front door and you can see them from the road. Is that temporary? Is that, actually now we're saying is not an approved light source?
Yeah, I'm concerned a little about some of the wording too.
Yeah, I mean, when you really do get into the details, that's very problematic. I remember I had an instance where I got a call, zoning enforcement related, and it was about Christmas lights, and just that, to their point, you could see them from the neighboring property. And it was that situation where you were like, I get it, this person is reading this verbatim, they're being very literal and they're applying the rule, and I couldn't argue with them. It's a very tricky spot to be in as a zoning enforcement officer.
Could we then make the language more mild and just
Yeah.
make glare, noise, and other potential nuisances something that the commission should be considering and that
Should be-
applicants should be considering?
Yeah. Or should be minimized or something that.
Yeah,
Or-
rather
or-
than as specific as this is, because to me,
Yeah.
this
We're not,
reads
it's not a
as
black
a
hole.
rule. Yeah,
Yeah, land use activities shall.
you fix it, we'll and come
I'll
back
work.
next time.
I will work on this language. I appreciate everyone's comments and thoughts. It's so helpful to read this and think it through. Great. So then we get into anybody else on that
Well,
before?
Janelle, I just wanted to say that,
Yeah,
but I think that if we can get it in here somehow without it breaking the rules, I think it would be a good thing to try to do.
yeah. Oftentimes, towns struggle so much with noise from what I've seen. It's a really tricky one. Some towns go to a noise ordinance rather than having it in their zoning regulations. And I understand doing that. Sometimes it's just a tricky thing. Decibel readers and decibels and going out in the field and doing these things, I'm sure Karen can attest, like she doesn't want to go around as the sound police with a decibel reader. But to measure expectations as, you know, what are our expectations as residents and what do we expect from our neighbors, just some language around there to discuss noise in a general sense, in a sense that can be very much accepted and understood by all. It's
Right.
it's a little tricky.
Basically, what we're trying to say is that one of our general provisions or community standards is that thou shalt consider thy neighbor.
Yes.
It's that simple. But
Yes. I might want to even call 3.6 that exact verbatim, Anna.
go right ahead.
So I'll work on all of that wording, and then we get into other local, state, and federal requirements. This is in the existing regulations. I cannot recall off the top of my head, and I do have it buried in my notes where it's mentioned, but I think really bringing it to the forefront. This is really good language too, Karen, for that zoning permit, just for everyone that's reading the regulations and enforcing them, et cetera, to acknowledge that all the land uses need also to comply with all other applicable local, state, federal requirements, including but not limited to. So I did throw out some other regulations that are pretty common, and then left it very open. So it does also read and other regulatory agencies.
Good.
Okay. And then conflicting rules. So this is pulled from page 3. It's in the current section of minimum requirements. The header is confusing. The header actually says interpretation of regs in the current regulations. But what it reads is, it says these regulations shall be held to minimum requirements adopted for the promotion of public health, safety, and welfare, wherever the requirements of these regulations. And it used to read are variant with the requirements of any other lawfully adopted rules, regulations, ordinance, deed, restrictions, or covenants, the most restrictive shall apply. I took out that variant language because whenever I see the word variant, vary, it brings me to ZBA, where it's a variance, where this is just using the term are in conflict with, because that's what this sentence in essence is getting at. It's basically saying if these regulations conflict with other regulations, the most restrictive are going to be the ones applied. It's sort of boilerplate legal language that we run across a lot.
Yeah, and it's standard. Let's just say that it's standard language.
Okay. But I did make that one change because it said are at variance with.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
That's an old word.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
53.
So moving on. So definitions. There's a lot in this section. A lot of this, I hope we will tie to that use chart that we will also be getting to. So definitions, as we now know, are towards the back of the regulations. I think they begin on page 80.
Oh, yeah.
And they are sparse, and bringing them to the forefront and really making sure that there's a lot of other definitions that I'm finding in the regs where there's a defined term And it's deep within the regulations somewhere, but it would be really helpful if there was just a definition section. So at any given point, we could pull up and read these definitions. So thinking this through, the general rules, that is very much the beginning of the definitions now. I did bring a sentence into play where it reads, the Planning and Zoning Commission may address questions that arise regarding regulatory meaning of a word and or term contained within the regulations. That lends itself for a little bit of flexibility. We can't think of everything at all times. And then consideration is given to the express intent of the regulations, along with how it's been interpreted over time. So precedent is very important. So if there has been past practice of doing something a certain way or defining something a certain way, to stick with it and follow that consistency. And then whenever in doubt, there's the Webster's Unabridged Dictionary is referenced for any terms that are left undefined. The rules for interpretation, I brought many of these from definitions. The section that begins on page 80, I did leave out ones that I felt were either redundant or not helpful. And those were just, that was basically G that read, no, it's all in there. Uses of land, building structures not clearly permitted in various zones are prohibited. That's a really important one because the regulations are permissive. So everything defined in terms and stated as a use is allowed, but then anything not is not. And that's just the framework the regulations are in.
The word permissive is one that all of you commissioners have to learn and get comfortable with because it's not exactly clear what it means. It's kind of a legal term, but basically if it ain't in our regs, you can't do it. Somebody, I should go ahead and write that zoning regs for dummies book I've been saying I was gonna write for years.
Janelle, there's not a E there, A, B, C, D, F, G.
James, thank you.
You fell down.
I need you guys. Okay, great. We'll work that in. Glad I'm relearning the alphabet.
Another-
Janelle, just a question.
Yeah.
We referenced Webster's. Would it be worth referencing Black's Law Dictionary in there too, or no?
Whatever. So, Keith, I know different towns reference what they have handy. If anyone comes into the town clerk or to the town office and needs to look up a word, what I've seen is the town has ownership of the dictionary that's referenced just for their own sake. So I don't know how accessible that dictionary that you're referencing is.
Okay, no problem. It's just one of the most common law dictionaries. That's why.
I know,
Use
and
it.
sadly, they're so expensive.
Yeah, they're crazy expensive.
And Karen, this I pulled just from what the current regs are. If you have thoughts around, if you keep a different dictionary in your town office that you reference when you need to, and you want me to cite that, absolutely let me know.
Okay,
Because this was just carryover from what was in the current regs.
all right.
And then, so shall we jump right in?
Sure.
Okay, and I'm keeping a running list of thoughts of words that are undefined. If anyone else has thoughts of words that are undefined, by all means, let me know, because it's such an ironing out of figuring out how to define these words sometimes. So accessory dwelling unit was never defined in the existing regulations, though it was discussed. And this definition comes from Public Act 2129 because of the recent legal update to accessory dwelling units. And just, it has been defined very clearly. I also bring in these like terms, so accessory apartment efficiency unit, brought those into play. Okay, I see I
That's
can't see.
fine.
Okay.
Any comments, any concerns? Okay.
And then accessory use or structure. This I did update from what is currently listed, what is currently in the definition section. Because it did reference everything on one lot. And Anna brought to my attention that oftentimes, for example, there might be a barn across the road or that similar situation. So I have changed the language to read an activity or structure on a property that is incidental and subordinate to the main use of a site.
As I've said before, I've counted, I have a database. There are 44 properties in town whose garages, barns, and sheds are located across the road or next door on a separate numbered lot, with a street address. So we have to take that into account. We can't just say that the accessory structure must be on the same lot as the house, because some of them aren't.
Perfect.
Anna, are some of the accessory structures that have a different number a detached accessory apartment? on the same lot with
No. They are sheds, garages, studios, barns, you name it.
Are they pre-existing and then we don't want to
Possibly.
continue that moving forward?
I have no clue.
I thought the assessor assigned a second number for emergency, meaning that there was a human,
A fire.
so that if
Yeah.
somebody called from that.
When you look at the database, there's no consistent finding. There are just as many that
Really?
they had, when the principal residence is not on the lot, but it has a structure. And the lot is owned by the same owner as another lot that has a principal residence on it. They usually have two different street numbers, but one owner.
Okay.
And I know in the town of Kent, unless it's occupied, it does not get a street number.
That's right.
But I don't know.
We're not consistent. I've decided that we haven't been consistent in assigning street numbers, or else there's something I don't understand.
That's probably an assessor's question, because they assign street numbers.
Who?
The assessor assigns
Yeah.
street numbers. Yeah.
I just, we don't need to worry too much about
Oh, no.
it. Do not use language that suggests that someone has to put their accessory apartment in a structure that's on the same lot as their residential home, because they're not all. Some people have the barn across the road on a separate lot. We don't want them not to be able to have an accessory apartment in that, right? Everybody's
I
getting
have to think
tired.
about that. I think that.
I don't know if that's the case, because
I
it's
don't
a
think that
separate
is the
property.
case. It's a separate property if it's crossroad.
It's not an accessory structure. It would be the main dwelling of the
Yeah.
parcel.
Have you driven around here lately? This
Yeah,
is a
but-
rural area. People have, I've seen plenty of houses whose garages are across the road.
And yes, but then it's not an accessory structure.
Right.
It's a
What
primary
is
structure.
it then?
It's a primary structure on that lot.
Primary structure.
Yeah.
Oh,
Isn't it?
The lot across the way is with rare exception, in the case of, for instance, the septic system for the primary residence is across the road, which is linked. You can't sell a septic system to the house across the road.
maybe what we should do is one of us should have a conversation with the assessor about this. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, that's why I'm bringing it up, because I have talked to the assessor about this, about the numbering and things like that, because there often is confusion caused by that, but usually the second number is a 911 number for safety reasons, so that the firemen and police know that there's a possibility that they could have to think about the other structure to go to and find that number. That's why the zoning permit has 911 numbers on it.
But if it's a separate lot, there's no need to have for it to be an accessory structure. It can be its primary structure on that lot. So an owner
Right.
can own more than one
Exactly.
But
primary.
their assessed value, their definition on their ownership cards is not, primary structure. The
If they're
ownership
across,
cards
across
say,
the road, they're two separate parcels, two separate assessors parcels, but
Yeah.
they're never tied.
Yeah,
Karen, will it be useful if I send you the language that's
yeah,
that's on page 80 as written? So currently the regulations read a use or structure which is subordinate to and is used for purposes customarily incidental to those of the principal use or structure on a lot, versus this language here that talks about a site.
okay, yeah, let me.
I'll just send it. It's,
Okay.
and I might actually reach out, because I've been seeing more and more, and I'm not clear as to why. I have seen lawyers struggling around the secondary and like incidental and subordinate language. So I really want to get to the bottom of if that's getting out of fashion and why. Because I have seen a few situations where I've heard just in some conversation that it's very hard to deem something accessory or primary. And I know there's reasons behind it, but I don't quite understand it.
our own town attorney, when we were talking with him about the home business regulations, also commented on that.
I remember that. That is part of my inquisitive nature around.
Well, so let's leave this whole particular definition pending until we've done a little more research.
Excellent. It's a
And not
tough
make a
eight.
decision tonight.
Janelle,
Yeah.
what page did you say that the original was on?
The original definition is on page 80.
80, okay.
Then we get into accessibility, accessible. So as defined, we don't have this in our regulations, but that's a term to describe the usability of a facility, product, or service by people with disabilities. I think it's a uniform term. It's should be used, especially when we discuss parking. So to just define that. Access way. This is simple, a way of approaching or entering a property. Access includes ingress, the right to enter, and egress, the right to leave.
Fine.
Great. Then we get into agriculture. So
And this doesn't need to be blue. My understanding of the agricultural amendment that we passed, we chose specifically to use the definition, the entire definition in the statute, in our own regulations. So we've already made that was already a vote taken by us after a public hearing.
Perfect. So I'll make that black. My thinking was because it came from the statute to have it that color.
We had already done that.
Perfect. Excellent. So then we get into affordable housing. So that's a use that's mentioned in the regulations. It's not defined within the regulations.
Good for you.
And this is just very general Connecticut definition. And it leaves some flexibility because the standards are constantly changing, just so that as amended is worked its way in there, because every year these limitations of income level, et cetera, does change. Attainable housing, that's now within the attainable housing cut section. So this just brings it into the definitions. So again, we're seeing our definitions all in one place. Application is in the current regulations. The one thing I did change the language currently in there is for approval. I changed it for review because it's sort of implicit approval, which might not always be when one receives an application.
Yep, that's helpful.
And then we get into buffer zone was very explicitly defined around the Housatonic River overlay zone, the overlay, and we will certainly get into that when we get into overlays, but I also don't want to lose sight of what buffer zone in a very general planning sense means. And that's when we're separating two distinct land uses to mitigate the effects of one on the other. In the Housatonic River overlay zone, we will get into what all of the particularities of that overlay are.
Yeah.
Then we get into buildable area. So within the current definition, there's a stipulation that a buildable area is rectangular in shape. Verbatim, it says a rectangular area of a lot that contains no wetlands, water bodies, water courses, utilities, or easeway access, right-of-ways, or other naturally occurring slope. I struggle with that because from my practice, not every buildable area is rectangle in shape.
This
Yeah.
is another area that we talked about sometime during the course of the past year and also agreed to put on our list for future regulatory modification.
Okay.
While we're at it, since I'm reviewing our history, in the 1980s, the buildable area could be any shape it wanted to be, and the zoning enforcement officer, as long as it was 20,000 square feet, and the zoning officer was given a formula for how to calculate the area in a polygon. And I have all that on paper. So we should revisit that. But I
Why
don't.
should we go back instead of, they must have changed it, right, for a reason?
Yeah, I know, but you need, that would be to change something significant. You'd need a separate public hearing.
You would need, so the approach of this would be a public hearing for all inclusive, everything all at one time.
Right. As long
Could
as,
I would like to propose that we don't change that buildable area rectangular requirement at this go through.
that's what I'm saying. We shouldn't.
So
I
th-
see.
You
so
should
that we
put in the original rectangle language,
Okay.
because that's a regulatory amendment and we are not doing that. We're not going there.
Okay, just from
Thanks.
planning perspective, it's confusing to expect that a buildable area is going to be rectangle in shape.
We have all agreed with that, and we've talked about the ins and outs of it. I don't remember exactly what meeting it was.
Perfect. We will go back to as it reads on page
It's on my
85.
list of things to return to.
Perfect. I will use that pre-existing language.
Okay.
Perfect. Then we get into, so do we want to touch buildable lot as a new definition or do we not want to?
Janelle, before you go to that, can I go back to building an buildable area?
Of course.
You were saying here the portion of land, I know this is going to be changed, but just curious for any change in the future, the portion of land excluding any areas classified as 100-year floodplain? Or is this saying that you can't build in a 100-year floodplain?
Correct.
Is that what the regulation says now?
There are separate floodplain regulations.
Yeah.
There are separate floodplain regulations, but it's very customary that one cannot build in a floodplain.
Well, I built the greenhouse in a 100-year floodplain, and that was never apparent to me that that was any kind of regulation. 50-year floodplain is, but a 100-year floodplain, I don't think there's any building restriction. So I'll be
Well,
curious to read about
I
that.
think with what we're talking about for 100-year floods and weather things, I think we have to address it even more now.
Oh, no,
Because
no, no,
yeah.
no, absolutely. But I just didn't know if that was a part of the original regulation.
It seems
Aha.
like a moot point now, just because we will go back to that buildable
Right.
area. But
Yes.
let's pay very close attention when we do get to floodplain. We haven't dug in there yet, but just looking
Yeah.
at all of those details.
Yeah, because that would be a big,
Well, Army Corps regulations too are going to prevent you, I think, from building in the floodplain because you can't increase the amount of flood downstream from you by increasing the volume of the area.
Yeah, the
that's right. Yeah.
Mhm,
impervious surface, etc.
mhm.
Well,
just-
even the structure, by your structure being in the 100-year floodplain, when the floods come, you take up area where water could be. So therefore, you displace water downstream of you.
That's right.
But just for
Bad
everyone,
Bruce, take it down.
no, for
No.
just for everyone, so we'll going back to buildable area as it reads now on page 81 in the current regulations.
Right. Okay.
It looks like that was updated in 2003.
Okay.
So buildable lot, and this is in addition, so anything that is in addition. A buildable lot, I just want to see. No, this actually, and I need to get the page number, that's where I need to start putting the page numbers of the current regulations. This is mentioned elsewhere in the regulations, not in the definitions, but it is defined.
It's a nice tight description. I think it's perfect.
Okay. Oh, this came into play, actually, this was incorporated when attainable housing cut was written. This buildable lot definition came into play when that amendment was added to the regulations.
Mhm.
I think we're all fading fast, but
Yeah, I've been watching my time. It's 8:50. Let's stop there.
Anna, we need 5 minutes. I might have missed it because I came in late. Did we discuss some of the parameters of the January 26th?
No, so, okay, we'll stop this discussion now. I'm just going to fill you in that we have sent out an invitation to lots of different organizations in town to come to our January 27th meeting. They have all received a copy of Janelle has reformatted, taken the goals out of the town plan and put them on pretty pages. I will send you all a copy of that, which we will present at the beginning of the meeting to remind the presenters that we're asking them to talk solely about the activities of their organizations relative to the town plan goals. And that's an effort to let as many people as possible speak without keeping us there for 4 hours. And then we will open the space to public comment. For the sake of people who are too shy to speak publicly, and one of them is actually watching us tonight, we will have the chat room directed towards our secretary, who's not present tonight, to allow those comments to be recorded through the chat space, as well as all questions. I feel free to discuss this, but my thought about the questions is not all of them may be appropriate. And because they may not pertain to the agenda. So I would like us to have a chance to pick and choose which questions are appropriate to take. Again, for the sake of conciseness and length of the meeting. So what do you think of all of that? I'm just worried that we will get stuck languishing for hours and hours and hours.
Well-
And it'll be tough.
Can I just, I had a chance to talk to Gordon this morning and there was a question, should we put a time limit on our partners? 3 minutes, 5 minutes?
Well, that's a really good thought. Let's see how many respond that they're going to participate. Let's think about, yeah. I know from past experience that some people bring, like Todd Piker brought 3 single-space typewritten pages once and read them out loud. There are enough people. It's just too much.
We just have a suggested amount of time or something rather than an actual timer. going.
Right, and then we don't need to sit there with a gavel, but let's maybe make a suggestion.
I'm not sure if anybody has attended a recent meeting that the DEP put on about Houstonic Meadows. It was 3 minutes. At 3 minutes, you didn't talk anymore. The button went off.
Yeah,
But
well,
if somebody has 3 pages of whatever and times it out, if they can't finish talking, the written commentary can be put up on.
right,
Yes.
right.
So if somebody
So
wanted to
maybe
submit.
we need to follow up the invitation with another letter clarifying that due to the large number of participants we're hoping to get, we'd like you to keep your remarks to 5 minutes. And if you want to submit a larger written report, we'll put it up on the website. For
And
everyone.
I was at that meeting that Karen was at, and 3 minutes is not enough. But 5 minutes, I think, is
Yeah,
absolutely adequate.
yeah, we use 5 minutes for our public hearings and it seems to work pretty
Yeah.
well. And of course, we're not gonna be rude to someone who's on a roll and who has a rapt audience, but we'll have to feel our way forward on that.
Oh,
I
and
will
then,
also be making the usual comment that people who make any personal attacks on anyone in attendance will be muted.
What about people not in attendance?
Any personal comments about anybody will be muted. That's not thank you, Janelle.
You're welcome.
It's not the space, it's not the forum for that. And will never be a forum for that.
I'm asking because I will not be there that evening.
I know, Janelle.
my other question is, and we've seen it just a couple of times at some of our planning meetings, is the crosstalk, and that you have a presenter who all of a sudden becomes, I want to know why is doing this when it has nothing to do with the town plan and the goals. Where are we
Look,
going?
well, okay, so in our additional letter, we need to clarify that this is the Planning and Zoning Commission's meeting, that we are running it, that remarks and questions and comments need to be addressed to us. And if the question can be answered from an audience member, needs to be answered by a member of the Conservation Commission, then we'll ask them to answer it.
Okay, so you're going to act as the filter and stuff.
MC, so to speak, yes.
I just wanted to clarify that because that has, that has come up, and if you have a presenter who's
Yeah,
presenting and all of a sudden ends up, being,
right. I mean, I think, we all want it to be a positive experience for everyone who attends. And but we also don't want to have a completely uncontrolled session.
Yeah.
And I personally have attended such things in the past, and I'm hoping that we can tone it down a bit.
that's
Does
where.
this sound okay to everybody?
Yes.
You will all, of course, be attending and listening attentively, right?
Of course.
Is there anything we need to do in preparation for this, or we just show up and listen?
I think show up and listen, and maybe, I had asked Karen to prepare a summary of what we have done as a commission over the past year, since I'll be busy being a chair. But maybe the vice chair wants to work with Karen on that. What do you think?
I'm on
James?
vacation.
Okay, never mind.
Sorry.
Karen can do a great job of summarizing our new
If
regulations.
something comes up, let me know.
Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I guess on the implementation task list, that having check boxes next to what people have done, especially the commission, is a good thing. And I've got to sit down and listen to what everybody said that they might have done it, before now,
Right,
and see
right.
what progress has been being made. Because
You're
last
gonna
year, no one ties their speech to the verbiage of the plan. Sometimes you do have to interpret.
Right, well, I'm hoping that we will have the screen open to the goals of the plan that on one side and the speaker on the other, maybe. Can you manage that, Karen? Because
Oh,
Janelle
great
mentioned
stuff.
there. Yeah?
I might have to get some help. I might talk to my wing person.
Okay, fine. I need to learn
not
how to
too-
do these things
yeah.
myself. I bet Phil could do it. This absent Phil who's getting all the assignments.
Hey,
Is there,
when you don't show up and you're elected secretary,
Right, exactly.
any, okay, one final chance for commissioners to speak up and say anything on their minds.
Yeah, I'd like to tell James that it's 5 degrees outside here. What's the temperature where you are?
It's in the 70s, I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't mean to rub it in, and I feel really lucky, so I'm sorry.
Listen.
It's cold.
You better be wearing a sweater on January 27th when you attend.
Right.
and we
I'll
don't
act the
care
part,
how
yeah.
hot it is, sweat.
Could I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So
I make a
moved.
motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Bruce, seconded by Will. This meeting is adjourned at 9 PM and thank you, Rich. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Janelle.
Thanks, guys.